The moment the door slammed shut, it felt as though the air had been sucked out of the room. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the empty space Naomi had left behind, her words still echoing in my head. "I can't do this anymore, Ethan," she had said, her voice tinged with frustration and finality. "I need to live my life. I can't just sit here waiting for you to die." It was a brutal statement, devoid of the compassion I'd always believed defined our relationship. In that moment, something inside me cracked. I had known my diagnosis was a burden. Terminal cancer wasn't exactly something you could brush off, but I never imagined it would push Naomi to leave. For weeks, the signs had been there. The late-night phone calls she took in another room, the excuses to avoid coming home, the increasing distance in her gaze. I had chosen to ignore them, chalking it up to her struggling with my illness, just as I was. But now, the truth was undeniable. She had left me for someone else. Ryan. A name that now burned into my mind like an ember. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to let the betrayal consume me. But instead, I sat there, numb. My chest ached, though not from the cancer. This was a different kind of pain, one that hollowed you out from the inside. The days that followed were a blur of loneliness and disbelief. The apartment, once filled with laughter and shared memories, now felt unbearably silent. Naomi's absence was a weight I carried everywhere I went. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was the one dying, yet she was the one who had given up. Liam was the first person I called after she left. My oldest friend, the kind of person who could make you laugh even when the world felt like it was falling apart. When I told him what had happened, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "She actually said that to you?" he finally asked, his voice heavy with disbelief. "Yeah," I said quietly. "She's gone, Liam. She moved in with Ryan." "Unbelievable," he muttered. "Ethan, I'm coming over. You shouldn't be alone right now." True to his word, Liam showed up that evening, a six-pack of beer in one hand and a bag of takeout in the other. He didn't bombard me with questions or force me to talk. Instead, he sat with me in the living room, eating greasy burgers and watching reruns of old sitcoms. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of normalcy, a small reminder that not everything in my life was broken. But even Liam's presence couldn't completely fill the void Naomi had left. I spent nights lying awake, replaying the moment she walked out, wondering if there was something I could have done differently. Was it the diagnosis? The endless doctor appointments? The way our conversations had shifted from dreams of the future to discussions about my treatment plan. Deep down, I knew the answer. Naomi's departure wasn't about me, it was about her. She couldn't handle the weight of my illness, the uncertainty of what lay ahead, and rather than confront her fears, she had chosen to run. It was a truth I had to face, no matter how much it hurt. In the quiet of those sleepless nights, I made a decision. I couldn't control Naomi's actions, but I could control my own. I wouldn't let her betrayal define my final days. If she didn't have the strength to stay, I would find the strength to move forward without her. It wasn't an easy resolve to make. Grief has a way of pulling you under, of whispering lies about your worth and your place in the world. But each day, I forced myself to take one small step forward. Some days, it was as simple as getting out of bed. Other days, it was calling Liam to talk about anything other than my diagnosis. I didn't know how much time I had left, but I knew I wanted to spend it with dignity. Naomi's departure had shattered my heart, but it hadn't destroyed my will. If anything, it gave me a reason to fight, to prove to myself that I could endure, even when the person I thought would be by my side chose to leave. The days after Naomi left were an emotional minefield. Mornings were the hardest. I'd wake up, instinctively reaching for her on the other side of the bed, only to find cold sheets and emptiness. It wasn't just her absence. It was the silence, the lack of her humming in the kitchen, or the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the hallway. The apartment, once our sanctuary, now felt like a hollow shell. Liam became my lifeline during those days. He showed up unannounced, his easygoing nature a balm to my fractured soul. He didn't coddle me or offer empty platitudes. Instead, he showed up with simple acts of care. A warm meal, a fresh stack of books, or an old movie he knew I loved. You're not getting rid of me, you know, he said one afternoon as we sat on the couch, flipping through channels. I've seen you through worse haircuts, Ethan. This is nothing. I laughed, the sound unfamiliar and raw in my throat. Yeah, but I've never been this pitiful before. Pitiful? Please, Liam scoffed. You're handling this better than I would. If I were in your shoes, I'd be halfway through a tub of cookie dough and rewatching every bad romantic comedy ever made. I shook my head, a small smile tugging at my lips. You're making me sound like a superhero. You're not a superhero, he said, his tone suddenly serious. You're just a guy going through hell, but you're still here, and that's enough. His words stayed with me, a quiet reminder that surviving, even in the smallest ways, was its own kind of victory. Over time, I began to let Liam in more. He helped me navigate doctor appointments, sitting with me in sterile waiting rooms and cracking jokes to ease the tension. When the nurses came in with test results or treatment plans, he listened intently, taking notes in a way that made me feel less alone. One afternoon, after yet another round of scans, Liam turned to me in the car. You know, he said, this whole thing with Naomi, it doesn't define you. I stared out the window, the weight of his words sinking in. It feels like it does, I admitted. She was supposed to be my partner. And now she's not, he said firmly. But that's on her, not you. You're still you, Ethan. The guy who loves terrible coffee and gets misty-eyed over Pixar movies. Don't let her take that away. His words struck a chord, igniting a flicker of something I hadn't felt in weeks, hope. Maybe he was right. Maybe I wasn't as broken as I felt. I started taking small steps toward reclaiming my life. Liam encouraged me to focus on the things I could control, the little moments that made each day bearable. I began journaling, pouring my thoughts onto the page in a way that felt both cathartic and grounding. Writing became my therapy, a way to process the storm of emotions swirling inside me. Liam also nudged me toward finding a sense of purpose. You've got all this wisdom now, he said one evening over dinner. Why not share it? Do something meaningful with it? What, like start a blog? I joked. Sure, he said, his grin infectious. Or write a book. Or volunteer. The world could use more Ethans. I rolled my eyes, but the idea stuck. I wasn't ready to dive into anything big, but I began exploring ways to give back. It started small, donating books to the local library, sending letters of encouragement to others facing similar diagnoses. Each act, no matter how minor, felt like a step toward reclaiming the pieces of myself that Naomi's betrayal had scattered. Through it all, Liam was there, his unwavering support a constant reminder that I wasn't alone. He didn't have all the answers, no one did, but he showed up. And in a world that had felt so empty, that meant everything. As the weeks turned into months, I began to see glimpses of a future I hadn't dared to imagine. It wasn't the life I'd planned with Naomi, but it was a life nonetheless. A life filled with resilience, small victories, and the quiet strength that comes from knowing you've weathered the storm. And in those moments, I realized something important. Naomi's betrayal might have broken my heart, but it hadn't broken me. With Liam by my side, I was slowly, stubbornly piecing myself back together. When I first received my diagnosis, the doctors had given me a grim timeline. 6 months, maybe 8 at most. At the time, those numbers felt like a death sentence, a countdown to an inevitable end. But here I was, a full year later, still standing, still breathing, still living. It wasn't just a second chance, it was a challenge. If I was going to defy the odds, I had to make it count. Liam was the one who nudged me forward, as always. You're not dead yet, Ethan, he said one morning as we sat on the balcony, watching the city wake up. Maybe it's time you started living again. I raised an eyebrow at him, my coffee cup halfway to my lips. You make it sound so easy. It's not, he admitted. But what's the alternative? Sitting around waiting for the other shoe to drop? That's not you, man. He was right, of course. I had spent so much time preparing for the end that I hadn't allowed myself to think about what might come next. But as the days turned into weeks and my health stabilized, I realized I had a choice. I could let my illness define me, or I could reclaim the pieces of my life that it hadn't taken yet. It started small. I dusted off my old sketchbooks, the ones that had been shoved into the back of the closet years ago. Drawing had always been my escape, a way to quiet my mind and focus on something tangible. At first, my hands felt clumsy, the lines uneven and shaky. But as I kept at it, the muscle memory returned, and with it, a sense of accomplishment I hadn't felt in ages. Liam noticed the change almost immediately. "See? I told you," he said one evening as I showed him a half-finished sketch. "You've still got it." "It's a start," I said, feeling a flicker of pride. But it wasn't just art that I rediscovered. I started cooking again, experimenting with recipes I'd always been too busy to try. The kitchen became my sanctuary, a place where I could lose myself in the rhythm of chopping vegetables and stirring sauces. Liam, ever the willing taste tester, offered plenty of encouragement and the occasional blunt critique. "This is great," he said one night, gesturing to a plate of chicken marsala. "But maybe ease up on the garlic next time. I can feel my ancestors weeping." I laughed, the sound genuine and full. Moments like these reminded me that life didn't have to be perfect to be meaningful. It just had to be lived. I also started to venture beyond the apartment. With Liam's encouragement, I joined a local support group for individuals facing terminal illnesses. At first, I was hesitant. Sharing my story with strangers felt daunting, but I quickly realized how much I had in common with the people there. We laughed, cried, and shared our fears, creating a community where vulnerability wasn't just accepted, it was celebrated. One of the group members, an elderly woman named Margaret, had a way of cutting through the noise. "The way I see it," she said during one meeting, "every day you wake up is a gift. What you do with it is up to you." Her words stuck with me, becoming a mantra of sorts. Every day I woke up was a day to be grateful, a day to create, connect, and grow. Slowly but surely, my life began to take on new meaning. Even my health seemed to stabilize, defying the odds in ways that baffled my doctors. "I don't know how you're doing it, Ethan," my oncologist said during a routine checkup, "but whatever you're doing, keep it up." It wasn't just my body that was healing, it was my spirit. For the first time in a long time, I felt like myself again. Not the Ethan who had been shattered by betrayal or defined by his illness, but the Ethan who loved art, laughter, and the simple joy of a well-cooked meal. Of course, there were still hard days, days when the weight of it all felt unbearable. But even in those moments, I found strength in the people around me. Liam's unwavering support, the camaraderie of the support group, and my own determination to make the most of whatever time I had left all kept me moving forward. By the end of that year, I felt like a different person. The Ethan who had once been consumed by despair was gone, replaced by someone stronger, someone who had learned to embrace life in all its messy, beautiful complexity. And as I stood on the balcony one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I realized something profound. This wasn't just a year of survival. It was a year of growth, a year that had taught me the true meaning of resilience and the power of choosing hope over fear. It was an unremarkable Tuesday afternoon when the doorbell rang, cutting through the quiet hum of the apartment. I had just finished cleaning up after lunch, one of my culinary experiments that Liam had humorously dubbed a masterpiece of questionable proportions. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I figured it was a delivery or a neighbor. But when I opened the door, the last person I ever expected to see stood on the other side. Naomi. She looked almost the same as the day she left, except for a few subtle changes. Her hair was styled differently, and there was a confidence in her stance that bordered on arrogance. She was dressed impeccably, as though she'd stepped out of a catalog, and her lips curved into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Ethan," she said, her voice smooth and practiced, as though this was a casual reunion between old friends. "You look well." I blinked, unsure if I was hallucinating. For a moment, I didn't speak, the shock of seeing her again rendering me speechless. But then her gaze flickered behind me, into the apartment, and I remembered exactly who she was and what she had done. "What are you doing here, Naomi?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. She brushed past me into the apartment without waiting for an invitation, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. "I was in the area," she said lightly, her eyes scanning the room. "Thought I'd stop by." It was a lie, of course. Naomi had never been one to show up unannounced, much less without a clear agenda. Her gaze lingered on the artwork I had framed on the walls. My artwork and the books stacked neatly on the coffee table. "You've redecorated," she remarked, her tone almost accusatory. "I have," I replied. "A lot has changed since you left." Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she regained her composure. "I see that. You've been busy." The air between us was thick with unspoken tension, memories of her departure hanging like a ghost in the room. I crossed my arms, leaning against the counter as I watched her. "Why are you really here, Naomi?" She hesitated, her carefully curated mask slipping just enough for me to catch a glimpse of something deeper. Nervousness, perhaps? But then she straightened, her chin lifting as she spoke. "I heard about your situation," she said, her voice softer now. I thought you might need someone." I laughed, the sound bitter and sharp. "You thought I might need someone? That's rich, coming from you." She flinched, but I didn't stop. "You left, Naomi. You walked out on me when I needed you the most. And now, a year later, you show up out of nowhere, expecting what? A warm welcome?" Her confidence wavered, but she quickly recovered, her tone shifting to one of practiced indignation. "Ethan, I was overwhelmed. You can't imagine what it was like for me." "Oh, I can imagine," I said, my voice cold. "It must have been so hard for you to move in with Ryan and start a new life while I was trying to survive." Her cheeks flushed, and for the first time, she seemed genuinely uncomfortable. "Ryan and I, that's over," she admitted quietly. "It didn't work out." There it was. The real reason for her return. Ryan was gone, and she was here because she thought she could pick up the pieces of the life she'd left behind. "Let me guess," I said, my tone sharp. "You thought I'd be gone by now, that you'd waltz in here, find an empty apartment, and claim whatever you could." Her silence was answer enough. I took a deep breath, willing myself to stay calm. "Naomi, I don't know what you were hoping to accomplish by coming here, but let me make one thing clear. I'm not the same person you walked out on. You don't get to come back and pretend like nothing happened." Her expression shifted, a mixture of guilt and defiance. "I made mistakes, Ethan, but we were married once. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" "It did," I said quietly, "but you threw that away, and I've moved on." The words hung in the air, heavy with finality. For the first time since she arrived, Naomi looked unsure of herself, her bravado crumbling under the weight of reality. "I didn't expect this," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "You thought wrong," I interrupted. "Whatever you came here looking for, you won't find it. Not anymore." She stood there for a moment, her shoulders slumping as the realization set in. Without another word, she turned and walked toward the door. As it closed behind her, I felt a strange sense of relief, as though a long-closed chapter had finally been laid to rest. Naomi had returned, but she was no longer part of my story. And for the first time, I truly felt free. Naomi's return wasn't something I could ignore, even after she walked out of my apartment that first day. She had left a storm in her wake, and I knew it wouldn't be the last time I'd see her. True to form, Naomi didn't wait long before trying again. This time, she didn't bother with pretense. She came looking for answers, or perhaps redemption. It was a crisp afternoon when the doorbell rang again. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to pretend I wasn't home and let her face the reality that she was no longer welcome in my life. But another part of me, the part that had endured months of betrayal and heartbreak, needed closure. When I opened the door, Naomi stood there, a hesitant smile on her lips. She held a coffee cup in one hand, as though offering a peace token. Her eyes, however, betrayed her nervousness. "Ethan," she began, her voice softer than before. "Can we talk?" I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Talk about what, Naomi? The fact that you left me when I needed you the most, or the fact that you're only here now because your plans fell apart?" She flinched, but her smile remained, though it was more strained now. "I know I hurt you," she said carefully, "and I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness, but I need you to understand why I did what I did." I stepped aside, motioning her to come in. Fine. Explain, I said, my tone flat. She entered cautiously, as though stepping into unfamiliar territory. I closed the door behind her and gestured for her to sit, but she remained standing, her hands clutching the coffee cup like a lifeline. I was scared, she admitted, her voice trembling. When you got sick, it felt like my whole world was falling apart. I didn't know how to handle it. And your solution was to leave? I asked, my voice calm but laced with disbelief. To run off with someone else instead of facing it with me? Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't let them sway me. I had seen those tears before, used as weapons to deflect responsibility. Ryan was a mistake, she said, her voice breaking. I thought I could find comfort in something new, something easier. But I was wrong. I shook my head, letting out a bitter laugh. Easier. That's what I was to you? An inconvenience you couldn't be bothered to deal with? It wasn't like that, she protested. I loved you, Ethan. I still do. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I refused to let them break me. You have a funny way of showing it, Naomi. Love doesn't abandon someone at their lowest. Love doesn't walk out the door and pretend the vows you made meant nothing. She looked down, her grip on the coffee cup tightening. I know I messed up. I don't expect you to forgive me. I want to make things right. I stared at her, searching for any trace of the woman I had once loved. Making things right isn't something you can do with a coffee cup and a few tears. You didn't just leave, Naomi. You broke me. And then you had the audacity to show up here, thinking you could waltz back into my life like nothing happened. I didn't know you'd still be here, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought you'd be gone. And that's the problem, I said, my tone sharp. You didn't care enough to check. You were so wrapped up in your own life that you didn't even bother to see if I was still fighting. Her tears spilled over now, but I didn't let up. Naomi, you made your choice. You chose Ryan. You chose to walk away. And now, you have to live with that. She sank into the chair, her hands trembling. I don't know what to do, Ethan. I've lost everything. That's not my problem anymore, I said, my voice resolute. You can't expect me to fix the mess you created. You left me to face this alone, and I survived. I'm stronger now, and I'm not letting you back in. The weight of my words seemed to crush her, and for the first time, I saw genuine regret in her eyes. But it wasn't enough. Regret couldn't undo the pain she had caused. I hope you find peace, Naomi, I said, my tone softening slightly. But you won't find it here. She nodded slowly, rising to her feet. I'm sorry, Ethan, she whispered. For everything. I didn't respond as she walked to the door. When it closed behind her, the silence was deafening. But it wasn't the oppressive silence I had felt when she first left. This silence was different, lighter, freer. It was the silence of closure, of finally letting go. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. The paperwork had been sitting in my desk drawer for weeks, meticulously prepared by my lawyer and sealed with the weight of finality. It was a shield, a safeguard against the possibility that Naomi might try to sink her claws back into the life she'd abandoned. And now, with her sudden return and her hollow apologies, it was time to use it. I met with my lawyer, Sarah, at her office the morning after Naomi's latest visit. She was sharp, efficient, and utterly no-nonsense, a perfect match for what I needed. As I laid out the details of Naomi's return, Sarah listened intently, her pen gliding across a notepad with practiced precision. She's trying to see what she can get, Sarah said bluntly when I finished. She assumed you wouldn't be here, and now that you are, she's scrambling. But you're in a good position, Ethan. We've already done the work to protect your assets. I nodded, the knot in my stomach loosening slightly. I just want to make sure she can't take anything, especially the apartment. It's not just about the money. It's about everything I've built since she left. Sarah offered a reassuring smile. Don't worry. Naomi has no claim to your assets. You've updated your will, transferred ownership of the apartment, and ensured that your accounts are secure. Legally, she's got nothing. Her confidence was comforting, but I knew this wasn't just about legalities. It was about standing up to Naomi, about showing her that I wasn't the man she'd left behind. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Naomi called later that week, her tone laced with false sweetness. "Ethan," she said, "I was thinking we should sit down and figure out what's fair. You know, for the apartment and everything else." I couldn't help but laugh, the sound bitter and sharp. "Fair? Naomi, you left me. You walked out without a second thought. What exactly do you think you're entitled to?" Her voice hardened. "I was your wife, Ethan. I have rights." "No, you don't," I said, my tone firm. "You gave up those rights the day you chose Ryan over me." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening, but I pressed on. "And just so we're clear, I've already spoken to my lawyer. The apartment? It's not yours. My assets? Protected. You don't get to come back and take what you didn't earn." Her indignation was almost palpable. "You're really going to throw me out like this? After everything we've been through?" "Everything we've been through?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Naomi, you abandoned me when I was at my lowest. You left me to fight for my life alone while you ran off to play house with someone else. Don't you dare act like you're the victim here." She started to argue, but I cut her off. "I've already filed the paperwork. You have no claim to my inheritance, my apartment, or anything else. If you want to contest it, go ahead. But I promise you, you won't win." Her sharp intake of breath was the only response I needed. The power dynamic had shifted, and for the first time in our relationship, I held the upper hand. The next day, Sarah finalized the necessary documents and sent copies to Naomi. It was a clean, decisive move, one that left no room for negotiation or manipulation. When Naomi received them, she called me, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. "You didn't have to do this, Ethan," she spat. "You could have handled this differently." "Maybe," I said calmly, "but I'm done putting your needs above my own. This is about protecting myself and making sure you can't hurt me again." She hung up without another word, and I sat back in my chair, a sense of relief washing over me. It wasn't about revenge, it was about closure. Naomi's betrayal had taken so much from me, but it wouldn't take anything more. Later that evening, Liam came over to celebrate the victory. He brought a bottle of champagne, insisting that we toast to justice served. "To moving forward," I said, raising my glass. "To leaving the past where it belongs," Liam added with a grin. As we clinked glasses, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Naomi's attempts to disrupt my life were over. The invitation to the annual neighborhood gathering arrived in my mailbox a week after Naomi's last call. It was a formal affair hosted by one of the wealthier couples in the area, a chance for neighbors to mingle and show off their latest successes. I'd never been particularly fond of these events, but Liam, ever the persuasive one, insisted I go. "It's time you made an appearance," he said, lounging on my couch with a soda in hand. "Show people you're not just surviving, you're thriving. And if Naomi happens to be there, even better." "Even better?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "I'm not looking for drama, Liam." "It's not drama," he said with a smirk. "It's justice. People deserve to know the truth about what she did." I hesitated, but deep down, I knew he was right. Naomi had spent years cultivating her image as the perfect wife, and her sudden return had likely stirred up curiosity among our social circle. If she thought she could waltz back into this community without consequences, she was sorely mistaken. The night of the gathering arrived, and I found myself standing in front of the mirror, adjusting my tie. It had been a while since I dressed up, but the reflection staring back at me felt different, stronger, more self-assured. This wasn't the broken man Naomi had left behind. This was someone who had rebuilt himself piece by piece. The house was already buzzing with activity when I arrived. Glasses clinked, laughter echoed through the air, and conversations flowed like fine wine. I spotted familiar faces, neighbors, colleagues, acquaintances, but one figure stood out, Naomi. She was holding court near the bar, her smile radiant as she regaled a small group with a story I couldn't hear but could easily imagine. She hadn't noticed me yet, which gave me the advantage. I made my way through the crowd, greeting people as I went, until I was within earshot of her group. "Ethan," a voice called out, drawing attention to me. It was Margaret, one of the few neighbors I genuinely liked. "It's so good to see you here." Her exclamation caused Naomi to glance in my direction. For a split second, her smile faltered, but she quickly recovered, her expression morphing into something resembling polite surprise. "Ethan," she said, stepping toward me, "I didn't expect to see you here." "Clearly," I replied, my tone cool but polite. The group she'd been entertaining began to disperse, sensing the tension in the air. Margaret, however, remained, her curiosity evident. "You two must have so much to catch up on," she said, her tone pointed. "Actually, I think everyone here deserves to catch up," I said, my voice steady. "Naomi, why don't you tell them why you really came back?" Her eyes widened, the color draining from her face. "Ethan, this isn't the time or place." "Oh, I think it's the perfect time," I interrupted. "After all, you've always been so good at telling stories. Why not share the one about how you left me when I was sick and moved in with someone else?" A ripple of murmurs spread through the room, all eyes now on Naomi. She opened her mouth to respond, but I didn't give her the chance. "You told everyone you were overwhelmed, that you needed space. What you didn't tell them was that you abandoned me in my darkest hour and only came back because you thought I'd be gone and you could take what wasn't yours." The murmurs turned into gasps, and Naomi's composure cracked. "That's not fair," she said, her voice trembling. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I said, cutting her off. "And so does everyone else now." Margaret's eyes narrowed as she looked at Naomi. "Is this true?" she asked, her voice low but firm. Naomi's silence was all the confirmation anyone needed. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Naomi left shortly after, her head down and her face pale. The room buzzed with whispered conversations, the carefully constructed image she'd maintained for so long now in ruins. As I stood by the window, sipping my drink, Liam appeared at my side, a satisfied grin on his face. "Well," he said, clinking his glass against mine, "I'd say that went well." I nodded, a sense of vindication settling over me. It wasn't about humiliating Naomi. It was about reclaiming my narrative, ensuring the truth was heard. For too long, I had let her control the story. Now, it was mine to tell. And as I left the party that night, I felt lighter, freer. The past no longer held power over me. The world knew the truth, and I was finally ready to move forward. The days following the neighborhood gathering felt like the calm after a storm. For the first time in years, the air around me seemed lighter, freer. Naomi's web of deceit had been untangled, her image shattered by the truth. While some might have taken satisfaction in her downfall, I found my solace elsewhere, not in her humiliation, but in the peace that came with closing a painful chapter of my life. Liam was the first to suggest I channel my newfound freedom into something meaningful. "You've got a second chance, Ethan," he said over coffee one morning. "Why not use it to make a difference? You've been through hell and back. Someone out there could learn from what you've survived." The idea stuck with me, lingering in the back of my mind as I went about my days. I had spent so much of the past year focused on rebuilding my life that I hadn't considered how I might help others do the same. But now, with Naomi firmly out of the picture and my health defying expectations, the possibility felt more real than ever. The first step was simple: volunteering at a local hospice center. It was a quiet place, tucked away in a residential neighborhood, where patients and their families sought comfort and support in their final days. Walking through those doors for the first time, I felt an odd mixture of apprehension and determination. This was a place of endings, yes, but also of connection and humanity. I spent my first day helping organize the center's library, sorting through shelves of well-worn books and stacking them neatly. It was small, unremarkable work, but it felt purposeful in a way I hadn't experienced in years. Over time, I began sitting with patients, listening to their stories, and sharing my own. There was something deeply humbling about those conversations, an unspoken understanding that we were all navigating the same fragile, fleeting existence. One patient, an elderly man named Harold, left a particularly strong impression. He had a mischievous twinkle in his eye and a habit of cracking jokes at the nurse's expense. "You've got to laugh," he told me one afternoon, his voice raspy but warm. "Laughter reminds us we're still alive." I carried Harold's words with me long after he was gone, letting them guide me as I continued my journey. Inspired by my experiences at the hospice, I began writing again, this time with the intent of sharing my story. What started as scattered thoughts in a journal soon grew into something more cohesive, a collection of essays about resilience, loss, and the unexpected beauty of life's imperfections. Liam, of course, was my biggest cheerleader. "You're going to help a lot of people with this," he said one evening as he flipped through the draft. "You've got a way of making people feel seen, Ethan. Don't underestimate that." But it wasn't just about the book or the hospice work. It was about the small, quiet moments that made life worth living. Cooking dinner with Liam, sketching landscapes from the balcony, playing cards with neighbors who had once been strangers. These were the threads that wove the fabric of my new chapter, each one a reminder that life, even in its simplest forms, was a gift. One evening, as Liam and I sat on the balcony watching the city lights flicker in the distance, he turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "You know," he said, "it's kind of amazing how far you've come. A year ago, you didn't even think you'd be here. And now, I feel like I'm finally living." I finished for him, a small smile tugging at my lips. "It's not the life I planned, but it's a life I'm proud of." We clinked glasses, the quiet sound of celebration carrying into the night. For so long, I had measured my life by what I'd lost, my health, my marriage, the future I thought I'd have. But now, I saw it differently. My losses hadn't defined me. They had shaped me, yes, but they hadn't broken me. As I drifted off to sleep that night, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. This was my new chapter. A life built on resilience, love, and the quiet strength that comes from choosing to move forward. And for the first time in a long time, I couldn't wait to see what the next page would bring. I hadn't heard from Naomi since the neighborhood gathering. For weeks, her absence was like an echo of the silence she had left behind when she walked out of my life the first time. But this time, I didn't feel the ache of loss or betrayal. Instead, I felt relief, a sense that I had finally reclaimed my peace. That peace, however, was interrupted one rainy afternoon when my phone buzzed with an incoming call. The screen displayed a number I didn't recognize, but something told me to answer. "Ethan," her voice came through, hesitant and softer than I remembered. "Naomi," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. There was a long pause before she spoke again. "I wanted to apologize for everything." The words hung in the air, heavy and unfamiliar. Naomi had never been one to admit fault, and hearing her say them now felt almost surreal. "I don't know what you expect me to say," I said honestly. "An apology doesn't undo the damage, Naomi." "I know," she said quickly, "but I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about how I left when you needed me the most. And you were right. I was selfish. I was scared, and I took the easy way out. I've been paying for it ever since." I leaned back in my chair, letting her words wash over me. Part of me wanted to hang up, to protect the peace I had worked so hard to build. But another part of me, the part that still remembered the love we once shared, wanted to hear her out. "What happened, Naomi?" I asked after a moment. She sighed, the sound heavy with regret. "Ryan left," she admitted. "He said I was too much to handle, that I had too much baggage. And he was right. I've been running from my problems for so long that I don't even know who I am anymore." The vulnerability in her voice was striking, but it didn't erase the pain she had caused. "And now you're calling me," I said, my tone steady. "Why?" "I don't know," she said softly. "Maybe because I feel like I owe you more than just an apology. Maybe because I don't know how to move forward." The honesty in her words was disarming, but I didn't let it sway me. "Naomi, I spent months rebuilding my life after you left. I found peace, and I found purpose. I'm not saying this to hurt you, but I don't think there's a place for you in my life anymore." Her breath hitched, and for a moment, I thought she might hang up. But instead, she said, "I understand. I needed to say I'm sorry. For me as much as for you." "Apology accepted," I said quietly. "But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, Naomi. It doesn't mean things go back to the way they were." "I wouldn't expect them to," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I just hope you know that I'll always regret what I did." There was nothing more to say. We ended the call, and I sat there for a long time, staring out the window as the rain streaked the glass. Her apology didn't change the past, but it felt like a small step toward closure for both of us. Later that evening, I told Liam about the call. He listened intently, his expression thoughtful. "Do you believe her?" he asked. "I think she meant it," I said. "But that doesn't mean I'm letting her back in." "Good," Liam said, nodding. "You've come too far to let her pull you back." And he was right. Naomi's regret was her burden to carry, not mine. I had spent too much time dwelling on her choices, and now it was time to let them go entirely. As I sat on the balcony that night, the rain had stopped, leaving the city glistening under the streetlights. The world felt quiet, peaceful, and full of possibility. Naomi's apology had given me closure, but it didn't define my future. I had moved on, and I wasn't looking back. The sunrise over the city was particularly beautiful that morning, painting the horizon in hues of gold and pink. I stood on the balcony with a steaming mug of coffee, the cool breeze brushing against my skin. It was a simple moment, but one that encapsulated everything I had fought to reclaim: peace, purpose, and clarity. Naomi's apology had been the final thread tying me to the past, and now that it had been cut, I felt lighter than ever. It wasn't about bitterness or anger anymore. It was about knowing that her choices no longer had power over me. She was a part of my story, but she no longer defined it. Life had taken on a steady rhythm, one filled with meaning and connection. My volunteer work at the hospice center had grown into something more: a mentorship program for caregivers and families facing terminal illnesses. It wasn't just about providing support. It was about creating a community where no one felt alone in their struggles. One of the patients, a teenage boy named Max, had become a surprising source of inspiration. Despite his condition, Max had an irrepressible zest for life, filling the hospice with laughter and mischief. "You've got to find joy wherever you can," he'd said to me one afternoon, grinning as he beat me at a card game for the third time in a row. Max's words stuck with me, becoming a mantra of sorts. I began seeking out joy in the little things: cooking a new recipe, sketching the skyline from my balcony, or simply sharing a drink with Liam as we debated the merits of old movies versus new ones. These moments weren't grand, but they were enough. They reminded me that life's beauty often lay in its simplicity. My book was another source of fulfillment. After months of writing and rewriting, it was finally finished. A collection of essays chronicling my journey through illness, betrayal, and rediscovery. Liam, ever my champion, had convinced me to self-publish, and the response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from people who resonated with my story, who found hope and strength in the words I had poured onto the page. One evening, I held a small gathering at the hospice to celebrate the book's release. Patients, staff, and friends filled the room, their smiles and laughter creating a warmth that I hadn't realized I needed. As I stood to give a short speech, I found myself overwhelmed with gratitude. This book isn't just my story, I began, my voice steady but thick with emotion. It's a testament to the people who stood by me, who reminded me that even in the darkest times, there's light to be found. To Liam, to the hospice staff, and to everyone here, you've all been a part of my journey. Thank you. The applause that followed was humbling, and as I looked out at the crowd, I realized how far I'd come. The man I was a year ago, broken, betrayed, and unsure of his future, felt like a distant memory. In his place stood someone stronger, someone who had learned to thrive in the face of adversity. As the evening wound down, Liam pulled me aside, a glass of champagne in hand. "You've built something incredible here, Ethan," he said, his voice filled with pride. "You should be proud of yourself." "I am," I admitted, a small smile playing on my lips, "but I couldn't have done it without you." He waved me off with a laugh. "Don't get sentimental on me now. Just promise me one thing: don't stop moving forward." "I won't," I said, meaning every word. That night, as I stood on the balcony once more, watching the city lights flicker in the distance, I felt a profound sense of contentment. My life wasn't perfect, no one's was, but it was mine. Every challenge, every heartbreak, every triumph had led me here, to a place of resilience and hope. The betrayal I had endured wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I had learned to embrace life in all its messiness and beauty. And as the first stars appeared in the night sky, I made a silent promise to myself to keep moving forward, to keep seeking joy, and to never lose sight of the strength that had brought me here. This was my life now, unapologetically mine. And for the first time in a long time, I couldn't wait to see what came next.